I wasn't sure if I would make it tonight. I had my second shot of that's the one, Moderna, thank you. Today, and so I'm feeling pretty good for now, anyway. But I'm a little spacey, but that also could be the pollen. So if I do what I just did for a very long pause, just enter meditation, and meet me on the other side. So we'll start out tonight again by reading these first 5 chapters of the Diamond Sutra together. I think everyone should have a copy there in front of you, and we're not chanting it. We'll just recite it. We won't recite the title. The Diamond Sutra. This have I heard. Once the Bhagavan was dwelling near Sravasti in the Nirmanakaya garden of Jeddah forest, together with a full assembly of 1,250 monks. One day before noon, the Bhagavan put on his patched robe, picked up his bowl, and entered the capital of Sravasti for offerings. After begging for food in the city and eating his meal of rice, he returned from his daily round in the afternoon. Putting his robe and his bowl away, he washed his feet and sat down on the seat set aside for him. After crossing his legs and adjusting his body, he turned his attention to what was before him. A number of monks then came up to where the Bhagavan was sitting. After touching their heads to his feet, they walked around him to the right 3 times and sat down to one side. On this occasion, the Venerable Subhuti was also present in the assembly. Rising from his seat, he uncovered one shoulder and touched his right knee to the ground. Pressing his palms together and bowing to the Buddha, he said, "It is rare, Bhagavan, most rare indeed, Sugata, how the Tathagata, the Arhan, the fully enlightened one, blesses bodhisattvas with the best of blessings. And it is rare, Bhagavan, how the Tathagata, the Arhan, the fully enlightened one, entrusts bodhisattvas with the greatest of trusts. Even so, Bhagavan, if a noble son or daughter should set forth on the bodhisattva path, how should they act? How should they practice? How should they control their thoughts?" The Buddha told the Venerable Subhuti, "Well said, Subhuti, well said. So it is, Subhuti. It is as you say. The Tathagata blesses the bodhisattvas with the best of blessings and entrusts bodhisattvas with the greatest of trusts. You should therefore listen, Subhuti, and ponder this well. I shall tell you how someone who sets forth on the bodhisattva path should act, how they should practice, and how they should control their thoughts." The Venerable Subhuti answered, "May it be so, Bhagavan," and gave his full attention. The Buddha said to him, "Subhuti, those who would set forth on the bodhisattva path should think this thought. However many beings there are in whatever realms of beings might exist, whether they are born from an egg or born from a womb, born from the water or born from the air, whether they have form or no form, whether they are able to perceive or not perceive, or neither perceive nor not perceive, in whatever conceivable realm of being one might conceive of beings, in the realm of unconditioned nirvana, I shall liberate them all. And though I thus liberate countless beings, not a single being is liberated." And how so? Subhuti, a bodhisattva to whom the conception of a being occurs cannot be called a bodhisattva. And why is that? Subhuti, no one can be called a bodhisattva who conceives of a being, a life, or a soul. Moreover, Subhuti, when a bodhisattva gives a gift, they should not be attached to an object. When they give a gift, they should not be attached to anything at all. They should not be attached to a sight when they give a gift, nor should they be attached to a sound, a smell, a taste, a thought, or a dharma when they give a gift. Subhuti, Subhuti, bodhisattvas should give a gift in this manner without being attached to any conception of its characteristics. And why is that? Subhuti, the body of merit of those bodhisattvas who give a gift without being attached isn't easy to measure. What do you think, Subhuti? Is the space to the east easy to measure? Subhuti replied, no, it isn't, Bhagavan. The Buddha said, likewise is the space to the south, to the west, to the north, in between, above, below, or in any of the 10 directions easy to measure. Subhuti replied, no, it isn't, Bhagavan. The Buddha said, in the same way, Subhuti, the body of merit of those bodhisattvas who give a gift without being attached isn't easy to measure. Thus, Subhuti, those who set forth on the bodhisattva path should give a gift without being attached to any conception of its characteristics. What do you think, Subhuti? Can the Tathagata be seen by means of the acquisition of attributes? Subhuti replied, no, Bhagavan, the Tathagata cannot be seen by means of the acquisition of attributes. And why not? Bhagavan, the Tathagata speaks of the acquisition of attributes as the acquisition of no attributes. The Buddha then told the Venerable Subhuti, since attributes are a fabrication, Subhuti, no attributes are no fabrication. Hence, by means of attributes, there are no attributes. The Tathagata can indeed be seen.
So, in the first of these talks, I said that the Prajnaparamita or the Diamond Sutra is not a book. It's not a text. That's very important for us to remember that we have a text, we have a book, we have a teaching. But when the book simply becomes what we can identify as the book, identify as those teachings, then it ceases to be a gateway. And what is most precious about these teachings is not that we can grasp them, but that they invite us into the possibility of a realm where grasping isn't the most important thing, where there's other possibility besides just creating meaning through understanding or through finding the edges of things and being able to identify them and keep them in their place and know what they are. This book has been handed down to us. That's important. We have a text. But that text is a gateway. And how to care for it, to care for that gateway, without just shutting the gate and putting a sign on it that says this is the gateway to whatever we want to call it, and then keeping the gate from actually functioning. How do we care for it in a way that we don't do that? When we really care about something, when something's important to us, it's very easy for us to do that. It's very easy for us to turn it into something, to make it very precious. But in our activity of making it precious, it becomes opaque. And the invitation can be lost. So what we've been studying over these past few weeks is how to care for this thing that we have been entrusted with. Humanity has been entrusted with. The Prajnaparamita Sutras showing up here as the Diamond Sutra. There's many versions of the Prajnaparamita Sutras. How do we care for it without shutting the gate? How do we listen to the invitation, respond to the invitation, and care for the gate by our continual entering into the gate and finding something new again and again? And that has been my goal for these 6 classes, is to help you in some small way to develop this relationship with the gateway, so that your life can feel that invitation and that you can develop your own path through walking through that gate and seeing what is there. This is very different than me just giving you my interpretation of the Diamond Sutra, right? Just kind of ornate carving the gate or painting the gate. I'm trying to give you some of my reflections, not so that you can hold on to them as being true, but so that they could be a kind of invitation to investigate further what is here. That's why we're only working with these first 5 chapters, is so that you can get a taste for that. Really, the teachings of the Diamond Sutra, they all show up here in the first 5. And then throughout the rest of the sutra, you can find them appearing in different ways, and the invitation appearing in different colors and different shapes, and different ideas. So as we go into this last talk tonight, I just want to remind you of that and encourage you that this is a starting place, and that you have the capacity to walk in that gate. And the gate might look like the Diamond Sutra, but it might look like something totally different. Right? It might look like the Prajnaparamita in 100,000 lines, or it might look like the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines, or it might look like the Heart Sutra, or it might look like the Lotus Sutra. It might look like the Bible. It might look like an empty niche in the wall. It might look like a flower. It might look like the sun. Did anyone see the moon this morning? It was low in the sky, and just this beautiful hook. And then it rose up a little bit and it pretended to be a cloud. Or the clouds pretended to be moons, I'm not sure which. But all of those things, this is really what these kind of teachings are inviting us into. So I'm curious, before I start talking tonight, if there's anything that's stirring for people. Questions are really maybe the key way that we take care of this gate, is that we're inspired by something to inquire more into it. Is there anything from last week's talk or other things that have come up?
Well, it's interesting to me, the 3 kayas, which I don't have a complete understanding of, but we work with it.
Thank God.
I just find that fascinating.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
I'm going to pause on that because I'm going to talk about that tonight a little bit, actually. You're ahead of me, or you're right with me, maybe. Ooh. Yeah. 3 kayas are the 3 bodies of the Buddha. And so I'll talk about it a little bit later tonight.
So I think in the meal chant, we have the line that's something like the giver and the receiver and the gift are one. So I've been sitting with that and with the 4th piece about giving. And I'm wondering if you could massage those together a little bit.
Yeah, so that's really, these are directly related in the meal chant. So when we're receiving a meal, there is always a giver of the meal, and the receiver of the meal, and the gift of the meal. And in the very traditional renunciate community, that's how it's functioning all the time. And the monks don't do anything to create food other than being hungry. And that is a way of creating food. And their job is to receive alms from the non-renunciate community to keep them fed. And although we're not renunciates here, some people are monks who are eating, and some people aren't monks who are eating. But none of us are renunciates. But we're following that same instruction. There's always the gift. There's always the receiver. There's always the giver. So in that, we actualize this practice of the Diamond Sutra in that act of receiving nourishment. And so we say it. We say, May we realize the emptiness of the three wheels, the giver, receiver, and gift. That although there is a giver, a receiver, and a gift, from one perspective, actually there is no independent giver, receiver, or gift. There's only a giver if there's a receiver, and there's only a gift if there's a giver and a receiver, and there's only whatever the other one is. They all need each other to be there, and that interdependence is what we take as the foundation for our nourishment. So although we're receiving a physical nourishment through food, we're also receiving the fundamental nourishment, which is nourishment of spirit, it's nourishment of soul, it's nourishment of community. Those things are there. They're not separate from the food. They are there with the food, and we want to acknowledge that in a deep way, not just kind of practically fuel ourselves. Have you ever seen those things, the runners and stuff? They have these like gel packs. You know, they're like these like little blocks of, you know what I think when I see those? Abomination. I just think, like, how come we would do this like most sacred thing? We'll just get it in a little cube, you know? But it has its place too, I'm sure. But not so much giver, receiver, and gift. I guess if someone gave you one, it would be nice. Well, I'll start in with what I'd like to talk about tonight, and there'll be should be plenty of time at the end for more questions if something comes up or something from tonight's comments. So, one thing I've been coming back to again and again these past few weeks is the ungraspable body of merit, which the Buddha speaks with Subhuti about when he says, you know, what do you think? Would the space to the east be easy to measure? No, the space wouldn't be easy to measure. Would the west, would the north, would the south, would above, would below, would this be easy to measure? And Subhuti says, no, it wouldn't be easy to measure. And we can think about that, you know, just the image of that. If you said, okay, that direction, could you measure it? No, you can't measure that direction. There's just no end to that direction. There's no beginning to that direction really either. This is this vast expanse. And the Buddha says, this is exactly the true body. This is the body of merit. When we overcome the clinging to a narrow understanding of who we are. When we're clinging to the narrow understanding of who we are as a subject in relationship to objects, then our body's always measurable. It's knowable in a certain way. But that we call ignorance, because to know it always is to set it against the objects of the world. My subject, the me, is always in opposition, or is only known through its definition as not being the objects of that subject. So the Buddha is this is very simple. It kind of seems, you know, sort of out there, but it's a very simple way of saying, look, that's actually not your true body. That's not your body of merit. That's not your awakened body. That's your body of delusion. And there's another kind of body. And you can participate in that body. And in participating in that body, you come to know liberation. And you can be seen by the Buddha, and you can see the Buddha. And you can see through the eyes of a Buddha when you allow that body to actualize itself. Right? And so in these 5 chapters, we can think about the first chapter as the Buddha sharing that body with the assembly, just living the very straightforward and simple life of the Buddha Shakyamuni. So very simple. He goes on his alms rounds, comes back, washes his feet. Notice that part. When you have a chance to walk barefoot, please do. He has to wash his feet because he walks barefoot, right? We kind of force our feet into these little narrow leather caskets and walk around all the time, you know? Like, we have these wonderful feet, you know, in this beautiful earth. And we're doing that all the time. So, you know, if you're in a snowy place, maybe it's good, but sometimes. But wash them before you come in. So he washes his feet, he sits down. It's very simple, you know, so inspiring to me, that image. And in fact, I've said many times, there's some commentators that say that's the Diamond Sutra. Everything else is a comment, as a commentary on the Diamond Sutra. So we can think of this as the Buddha is sharing that body by being present, by being evident, by being manifest, by being explicit. But don't make this mistake that we could know that Buddha in a grasping way. That kind of simplicity is unknowable. The reason it can be simple is because it's ungraspable. The Buddha doesn't say, oh, I will have this very prescribed life, and then I will show everybody. The Buddha is just enacting the ungraspability of life. And enacting that ungraspability is, oh, okay, I receive food. Oh, no. I'm receptive to the food. I receive it. And in receiving it, I overcome this division between the receiver and the giver and the gift. And so each thing is like that in this first chapter. Tonight I want to talk a little bit about the second, and particularly about entrusting. But I've left that to the end for a reason. In the third chapter, there is this presentation of the source. And it's called The Correct Source of the Great Vehicle. That's the title of this chapter. So what is right at the center of this ungraspable body? Or what is this ungraspable body centered through? And the Buddha says is centered through this thought, this unbelievably revolutionary thought, a thought of all beings being liberated. And that thought is so totally complete that every being conceivable is included, to the extent that that thought becomes a no thought. You can't think about the all-inclusiveness of it anymore because it is so fully all-inclusive. There's no place for the thought to go. You can't continue the thought. All you can do is just stop thinking about there being any being, because every single being is included. He says that's the aperture of the Mahayana. That is the source. That is what the body of merit is centered through. And then in the fourth chapter, he tells us how to practice that. Another way to say that is how to make it actual in the experience of our lives. How to realize it, how to actualize it. He says to give a gift. That's how you have to do it. This is actually the part that sold me on the Diamond Sutra. If someone said, what is the Diamond Sutra? Pick one line. I would say, give a gift. We don't even need the whole line. We don't even the rest of it that says, and don't be attached to something. That will come. If you give a gift, actually give a gift, that part will come. One way or another. So it's give a gift. That's it. And there's a way in which we could see all Buddhist practice, all practice of awakening. It doesn't mean just the Buddhist practice of Buddhism, but any practice of awakening is a practice of gift. And then last week I was talking about this fifth chapter, which is the most, I would say, enigmatic. If you felt confused by the things I was saying last week, join me. I was also confused by the things I was saying last week. Because if you see them and they make sense, you're probably not seeing through them. You're seeing an explanation. But this presentation of seeing, which comes in the fifth chapter, is an attempt to remind us that the Diamond Sutra is changing how we conceive. So you notice earlier on the Buddha says, any being which conceives of a life, conceives of all these beings, is not a bodhisattva. And yet the Buddha is asking us to vow to wake up with all these beings. So we have to conceive, but not conceive. We have to see beings, but not see beings, which is a very strange thing. Normally we say there is either something there or there's not something there. Those two are like mutually exclusive, right? It's a 1 or a 0. But this way is telling us, no, actually a 1 is a 0 and a 0 is a 1. If you see something, if you see Genki, you see Genki, there's someone there. But actually to see Genki is just to see The whole universe is appearing here as Genki. There's no Genki. There's no object of my mind called Genki that has some permanence that I can locate outside of myself. We are completely interdependent. So this is why the Buddha says we should see the attributes and the no attributes. Right? That the characteristics, seeing something, being able to grab something, and not being able to grab it, that both of those are important to give rise to the thought that you'll be awakened together with all beings, every single one, each and every one of them. But that actually that is no beings. It's attributes is no attributes. So this is changing the way that we think, changing the way that we see, changing the way that we know things. And it's a move from the grasping mind that's looking to know things as either being or not being. So this is the fifth. All of these are the Buddha's invitation into this ungraspable body of merit. Just different ways, different flavors of the gate. So in this second chapter, when Subhuti asks for instruction, earlier on when I talked about this, I emphasized the importance of asking. And tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about these curious lines at the end of the first paragraph of the second chapter, where Subhuti presses his palms together and bowing to the Buddha says, "It is rare, Bhagavan, most rare indeed, Sugata, how the Tathagata, the Arhan, the fully enlightened one, blesses bodhisattvas with the best of blessings. And it is rare, Bhagavan, how the Tathagata, the Arhan, the fully enlightened one, entrusts bodhisattvas with the greatest of trusts." It's very common in the sutras for there to be a list of epithets to refer to the Buddha. So we see that here. It has a nice ring. Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhan, the fully enlightened one. And these are all ways to describe the Buddha. They all have slightly different meanings. I'd like to think about this last line where he says it's rare how the Buddha entrusts bodhisattvas with the greatest of trusts. Now, when I first was studying this sutra, that was part I just skipped over. I thought, oh, okay. Yeah. Where's the good part? I was really energized by chapter 5. Then I had to learn to be energized by chapter 4. I think now maybe chapter 2. I'm getting energized. I'm working my way back to the center. Chapter 1. To be entrusted. Think of this assembly. The Buddha is completely awakened. And yet, he shares his life unreservedly with his students. He's entrusting something to them. He's entrusting his own life to them. He's saying, because you take up this vow of the Bodhisattva, I can invest in you. That's one way for us to understand that. And Subhuti sees that. He says, our intention is true, and we're trying to clarify it more and more deeply. We want to live the life of the Bodhisattva, fully and completely. And because Subhuti and the assembly have that, the Buddha can entrust them with the teaching. If they did not have that inspiration, then the Buddha's words, even if he offered them, they couldn't really be received. So one way to understand this, or one way to see it, It just has to do with what does it take to be the recipient of something? What does it take to give something, to really trust another being? Whether that's on the giving side or the receiving side. Right? There's a deep trust if we receive a teaching. There's a deep trust if we give a teaching. What does that take? It brings up this question of where are we going to put our trust? We've been talking about starting a Dharma TikTok account. But it has some, I think it's still in, what do you call it? Planning stages. Deliberation stages, yeah. The reason I bring that up is think about what we place our trust in all the time. Maybe TikTok seems like a lowbrow to you, but we are investing in these kinds of baubles all the time. We create an object of our amusement, right, in the world, and then we invest in it. We entrust ourselves to it. We entrust it to fulfill something in us. Right? Now, I'm not trying to be like a totally kind of like a stern about that and to say you should never do that, but call your attention to the fact that you do it. And then ask yourself, is that where I want to put my trust? And in this case, trust meaning, what's the basis of my life? What's the basis of how I'm going to live? Notice here that Subhuti then says, how should we live? I recognize that you trust us, and I trust you. Tell us, how shall we live? How shall we live? How should we carry this out? But first, this trusting is important. So, because we make the vow, we are entrusted. But it's also true that we are entrusted, and so we vow. Really, the vow doesn't come first. It's too much of a exchange mentality. Like, I'm going to make the vow and then the Buddha would trust me. The miraculous thing is actually the Buddha entrusts you before you make the vow. The Buddha sees your Buddha nature clearly, knows the ground of your awakening. Not because you took the vow in some experiential way that you could locate in this life, in this realm, but because the deep foundations of your heart are already turned towards the brilliance of the Buddha's vow. And so sometimes we realize that. Subhuti here, you could hear it that way. He's like, I don't know why you trust us, but somehow you do. It's wondrous. It's rare, Subhuti says. It's rare to be trusted like this. It's rare to be trusted even though I fuck up all the time. I mean, how many times do you mess up? To me, I don't even try to keep count. It's too many. And yet somehow this thing is entrusted to me again and again and again and again, moment after moment after moment. Is there. And when we wake up to that, the vow can flow from that. Right? So it goes both directions, and we need to learn to know both ways. Right? We need to know that actually I have to set my mind on something and head towards it. This has a lot to do with attributes. It has a lot to do with characteristics. It has a lot to do with being able to see something and head towards it. Right? But it's also true that in the total oblivion of our ignorance, we're still trusted in that place where we can't see anything. We can't say what is right or wrong. We're lost in our own incapacity. We have this ability to walk forward with the Buddha's trust, and for the vow to arise from that. So what will you do when you're trusted? Do you remember that in your life when you first really felt trusted? You know, I don't know, maybe you were a kid, and when I was a kid in the 80s, and we had this arcade downtown Salem. I grew up kind of close to the downtown, but not that close, you know. And when my parents were like, okay, be back by 11. I don't know, I was like 12 or 13. It was a little different back then. We got on our bikes, you know. We rode down to the arcade, pocket full of quarters. What was that like? The freedom of it, but also the responsibility. You know, they came together. A certain amount of fear and goofing off. You know. But what is that like? You know, when you feel trusted. This sutra is inviting us to think about that. You see, this issue of entrustment has a lot to do with this. It's very central to the Prajnaparamita teachings. In fact, we call Prajnaparamita the womb of the Tathagatas, the mother of the Buddhas. Think of a womb. It's totally dark, complete embrace. You know, it's quite a thing. My eldest daughter is pregnant right now. Like, people have been telling me, oh, being a grandparent's like pretty crazy, cool. Like, they don't say way better than having your own kids, but they kind of imply it. But I'm starting to get it as her belly gets big, you know, and it's kicking. I'm like, well, it's like the Russian doll thing. Like when you have your kid, there's like, oh, there's a kid in there. And then it's like, oh, there's a kid in the kid. It's really cool. It's really cool. Anyway, why did I get off on that? Oh, wombs, that's why. The womb of the Tathagata is completely mysterious. I mean, that's why it's completely mysterious and unbelievable to me that this being that I could place her head in my hand here, and then her legs would go to the other side, and I would walk around the house cleaning like this and just have her. She was born kind of early. She was only about 5 pounds, and I have big hands, and I would just hold her like this and do things. And now she's not a lot bigger than that. Now she's kind of small, but now she has this baby inside of her. You know, it's completely mysterious. What is that? But this is actually how it happens in all kinds of realms. You know, where is the Buddha? Where is that birthing of awakening? Is it inside of us? Are we inside of it? Is it inside what we thought was inside? Was it holding what we thought was holding? This goes on forever in all directions. The holding and the being held are not at odds with each other. You're not one or the other. They're not separate. They are the same thing. To hold is to be held. To be embraced in that womb, right, is both to be a Buddha, right, and to embrace as a Buddha. Now, in our tradition, we have a way of talking about this. We call it the Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese is kanon doko, which is very hard to translate. But it means something like there is a movement of our heart, and there is a response, and then there is an exchange of pathways. That's what the characters mean. So let me explain that. So it's referring to there is a feeling in the heart of living beings for liberation, for wanting to overcome suffering as being the kind of obvious center of our life, or the inevitable center of our life. And in this phrase, it's saying because living beings have that hope, they have that desire, that it moves the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to bring the Dharma forward, to bring it out into the world. So sometimes this is translated as supplication and response, which I don't like that translation that much, but it's like, oh, I need the help of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and the Bodhis and Bodhisattvas respond to that supplication, right? But it's a little bit more to say it's not a supplication like, oh, I have to pray for it. It's just the actual movement of our own heart towards liberation, towards the desire for liberation, which moves the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to respond. And in that, there is this communication of the path. So the third character means pathway or Tao or way. And the fourth character means an exchange or a communication. So it's saying that in this mysterious communication that happens between our desire for overcoming suffering for ourselves and others, that giving rise to the thought of awakening that happens in the third chapter, right? Think of all the possible beings, and I will save them all, or I will be liberated with them all. Right? That inspiration. That is, the Buddhas respond to that. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas respond to that. That it's not just that they respond and give us what we want, but that our pathway, the path of the Bodhisattva in the Buddha, and the path of a sentient being, they start to not be so distinguishable. They're no longer set against each other as the path of the ignorant and the path of the awakened. But because there is this relationship between ignorance and the desire to overcome suffering and the liberation of the Buddhas, those are inseparable. And because they're inseparable, those pathways, they come together. So this is exactly how the entrustment works. It's not just that we're entrusted because we're special, but it's because our own desire for, our own movement towards liberation for ourselves and for other beings is the response of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Our life becomes the life of the vow of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. There is a entwining there in which those cannot be separated. Now, that can sound very heady, but to put it into a more practical or more kind of grounded language, you think about something that you've done that really matters. If I go back to being a father, you don't know what you're doing. You just don't. You try to do your best. And when your heart truly desires for the liberation of yourself and for your children, to know peace of mind, then at the edge of your own capacities, that's the place where some possibility really emerges to meet your child. Not as the person who knows how things are supposed to be and is going to figure everything out, but as the being that can meet them there, and you can know something of that womb, the holding and being held, that births this awakening. That's exactly what has allowed this tradition to survive for 2,500 years. There's generations after generations of people caring for each other in that way, so that we can come to maturity in this mysterious, ungraspable body of merit. Not figure it out, but live it out. So these are all ways to talk about this entrusting, not as a subject-object relationship, as we might first read it, but we may experience the subject-object type facet of it. Oh, the Buddha entrusts us. Okay, cool. I got the book. I got to do something. But we got to go beyond that, right? Allow it to be a gateway rather than just a subject-object relationship. In doing that, there are different ways that we can understand what this Buddha in entrustment and bodhisattvas that are entrusted, what that's about. And this comes back to Kogen's question earlier about the three bodies of the Buddha. One way for us to understand this entrusting is that we are entrusted by Shakyamuni Buddha, the Buddha of this world. That Shakyamuni Buddha appeared here. Do you know what they called this world that we're in? The world of suffering. Congratulations. That was where you took your birth. This time. Yeah. But we've been entrusted by Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived in India 2,500 years ago and preached and taught many, 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 many things, some of which have been recorded, some which have entered into the deep minds of humanity and don't exist as texts, and some that have been entrusted to beings in other realms, and some which appear on paper, printed, for us to be able to encounter that way. To be entrusted by Shakyamuni Buddha is to be entrusted by ancestors, by the beings, recognized and unrecognized, who have taken care of these teachings for 2,500 years. And now, in this age, we have all of this kind of technology which allows us to receive those teachings in unparalleled ways. Right? You can go on, you can get the whole Chinese Tripitaka, which is like a lot of Chinese. Like I don't know how many. It's like my teacher has a copy of this at his where he was abbot before, and each volume's like this thick and this tall and a tiny print, and there's like 100 and some volumes, right? You can just look that up online now, and you can keyword search the whole thing. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So unparalleled access to these material sutras. That's been trusted, that's been handed down. But there's other things that have been handed down too. How it is that we encounter the sutras that can't be seen in text. Right? What are the ways in which we can encounter each other, the methods in which we can practice together, the methods in which we can make offerings that unlock the deep doors of our consciousness. Right? This has been handed down to us. It's been entrusted to us. It's been tried and forged, through the experience of many, many people's lives. We're entrusted through our teachers, where they share their hearts with us. We're entrusted by our community. So this is one way we can work with entrustment, to think about what it means to be entrusted. It's in a more practical way. It's like more thinking about what are the things, what are the experiences, so the level of experience that of phenomena in which I'm entrusted through those phenomena, whether they're material or otherwise. This is a way we talk about the Buddha's body. It is an immeasurable body of merit that is known as the Nirmanakaya, which is the embodied Buddha. It's the Buddha that shows up in phenomena. Right? May show up as a Buddha, but may show up as your friend, may show up as your enemy, may show up as a worm, can show up as all kind of things, but is showing up in phenomena. That we call the body of Buddha. There's the emanation body, the Nirmanakaya. But we can think of another. What is the way that we are entrusted? In the first way, where it's phenomena, there's always this kind of relationship between the Buddha and myself. I'm entrusted through a phenomena. But this way of thinking about entrustment is a Buddha which is your true self. A Buddha which shines brightly right in the center of the mandala, which is never separate from your own consciousness. This is the Buddha of infinite light that has accomplished the vow. We say that Amida Buddha became Amida Buddha because Amida Buddha made a vow, this exact vow that the Buddha teaches here, to save all beings. In the case of Amida Buddha made the vow to save all beings by establishing a pure land in which beings could fully awaken to their true nature. And upon the completion of that vow, Amida Buddha became Amida Buddha, and that pure land actuality was there. That Buddha of light is never separate from your own heart. You're entrusted by Amida Buddha. You're entrusted by yourself, and those aren't separate things. This is the Buddha that joins the whole body of abundant treasures as the stupa rises in the air, as the Lotus Sutra is being preached. This is a central image of the Lotus Sutra. Whereas the Buddha is about to preach the Lotus Sutra, this ancient Buddha, ancient here means completely timeless. Buddha that when this Buddha was passing into parinirvana, a great stupa was made, and this Buddha's body was put into the stupa, and the Buddha had made this great resolve that whenever the Lotus Sutras was preached, this stupa would appear. And so just as the Buddha is about to preach the Lotus Sutra, this stupa rises up into the air. It's like bigger than the earth, you know. And everyone's like, what's going on? And the Buddha explains. And then it's very curious in the sutra, it says, the whole body of this Buddha resides in the stupa. The whole body. Not a body that's divided into parts. Not a me and a you body, but the whole body. And then Shakyamuni Buddha rises in the air, and a whole bunch of things happen actually, and the doors open, and then the Buddha, this ancient Buddha abundant treasures, scoots over and invites Shakyamuni Buddha to sit on his seat. And the two of them sit there together in the stupa. He entrusts the Buddha. Those two Buddhas entrust each other with the truth of the Lotus Sutra. Where is that stupa other than right here in our own heart? And I don't mean that just in a feeling sense, like, oh, I feel so inspired by that, so that's where it is. I mean, actually, your mind is completely beyond your grasp. And there are things there that are a complete mystery to the part of your mind where things show up as phenomena, and you can identify them with ease. This is the realm of the Sambhogakaya, the fulfillment body of the Buddha. And this is a place where you're already entrusted, just like you've already been entrusted through the Buddhas and ancestors that appear in phenomena and have handed things down through time to you. This timeless awakening is constantly offered. And there is the entrustment from the Buddha that simply is. The thusness of each and all, the interpenetration of all things. In the Flower Garland Sutra, there's this powerful image, this very famous image of the jeweled net of Indra. And the Buddha's explaining this is the quality of the body of the Buddha. Is like a net that stretches in all directions. Think of like a 3-dimensional net, or like a many dimensional net. And where the ropes come together there's a jewel. In each of those nexus, there's a jewel. And every one of those jewels has the same number of facets on it as every nexus within the whole net. And every one of those jewels reflects every other jewel in the net. That's actually what it means to talk about how things are, or what it means for things simply to be. It doesn't mean, oh, they're just like an object of my awareness. That's actually how things are, and that is the body of the Buddha Virachana, the Dharmakaya, the Buddha Bhati, which is like space. But not like space that is the absence of things, but space which is just completely unhindered. We are entrusted by that Buddha too. That's why the Sambhogakaya Buddha can entrust us. It's why the Nirmanakaya Buddha can trust us. Is because essentially there is no separate place. So these three bodies of the Buddha that we entrust and are entrusted by, I'm just introducing them here because I want to continue inviting you not to get locked in one meaning within the sutra. So to be entrusted in the way that Subhuti talks here, we can hear it in one way, but there's many, many more ways to hear it. And this is an example of another way to hear it. If we say we're entrusted by the Buddha, what do we mean? That doesn't mean you should try to strike down the way that you understand it to begin with, to look for something else, always like scrambling over top of what you're currently experiencing to try to get to something else. That's not what I'm proposing. But I'm saying deeply treasure the way that you understand it now. Don't grab those attributes, but allow there to be another side. Allow there to be a continual extension. And then the sutra will teach you, over and over and over again. Any questions or comments?
It's not so much directly what you're talking about,
Yeah.
but the phrase that comes right after that.
Sure.
If a noble son or daughter should, just the word noble has kind of struck me as like, why
Yeah.
is that there? And is it, I don't know if it's just because of all the systemic things we're dealing with today, and I don't know when this was written and then the context of that, but just that word keeps catching me every time I read it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways that we can understand that in the kind of context of the history of the place. But essentially what it's referring to is the nobility of a person who dedicates themselves to the path. So we say like the noble truths, the first noble truth, the four noble truths, those are noble because they are the nobility of following the path of the Buddha. They're not noble because we are a king or we belong to some group that is like a inherited nobility, but is the nobility of following the path. And the Buddha was very radical in that regard. For example, upon joining the Sangha, you'll be released from kind of caste obligations. And so, we could go back historically, and there's a lot of bones we could pick, for sure. But generally speaking, that's what that's referring to. Yeah, the way I hear it, aside from the kind of like a analysis of it, is what is that part of us which is the lion? like the Lion of Judah. I loved. I'm quite a reggae fan, and if you listen to a lot of that kind of music, that calling the fire forward, the fire and the lion. These are like big images, and there's a part of it. The symbol of nobility oftentimes is the lion, and it has all kinds of like negative ways that it can go, right? But there's also that lion's roar of the Buddha. That's how we refer to an expression of awakening, is a lion's roar. Is that part of us which says, yes, that I'm going to go for it, even when I don't know exactly what it is, but the courage of my heart is going to carry me forward. And so that's not always where we should be or need to be, but that's also an important part. And so, here he's saying, when we've got the guts, right? When we've got the guts to jump into this thing, what should we do? That's the way I read it. Yeah. Sometimes these days, someone once asked me, once I was visiting a monastery, a Great Vow monastery, in fact, and I forget why I was there helping with something, and then I had made a comment that I didn't think monasticism was the most important thing, which was quite shocking to all the very dedicated monastics because they had dedicated their life to it. And so one of them asked me, well, what do you think is the most important thing for training? And I think at that time I said, what's a word that's kind of like sincerity but more sappy? Earnestness. No, but I think I would change my answer now. I think I would say guts. Yeah, like you got to put something on the line. And earnestness could get you there. Like that, it's kind of earnestness is sort of the Disney version, maybe, or Hallmark version of guts, I guess. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering about how we trust the Buddha, or wake up to where that trust is, where the trust in Buddha is.
Yeah. Well, there's it's not so easy. I mean, this is very central to what we're practicing in meditation. So especially when we learn to sit quietly for a while, just to kind of keep the body noise and the heart and mind noise not in check, but like we can hold it well enough that we could stay put for a little while. Then there's this question like, well, what am I going to trust? What's going to carry me through these moments? And is it, oftentimes what it is my own posturing. Like, this is what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to kind of clamp down on my breath a little bit and really focus my mind, right? Which is not a bad thing to do. We can learn a lot there, but it's also essentially just trusting in my own self to be able to get through those moments. But if we keep sitting, that becomes harder and harder to do, especially if we're willing to pull back on our own doing of meditation and to explore meditation as a receiving. And as that part of our mind shifts, then a deeper and deeper trust becomes necessary to be able to continue practicing. And then more than becoming necessary, it becomes deeply nourishing to exercise that trust through meditation, which is just the trust of simple presence, of being. And that's a deep trust of ourself, which is also a deep trust of the Buddha.
Mm.
So is one way, or one aspect of the way. I think another way, which isn't separate, but we can talk about it separately, is to trust our image of the Buddha. So one of the things that's important about this teaching of the three bodies of the Buddha is, in our tradition, Dogen Zenji was very strict about this and continues to be strict in the transmission, that these three bodies are never separate. But oftentimes people want to drive to the Dhammakaya as being the true Buddha and the Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya as being like the provisional Buddhas. This is not the teachings of this school. That those three are always completely interlinked. Mm-hmm. So we don't just drive to the Dharmakaya, which can be very convenient also, especially now in a world where oftentimes we want to undermine a kind of fantastical occurrences. We want things to be kind of rational. So Dharmakaya can kind of function with that, right? It's all pervasive. It never gets in the way of my thinking. And so I can use my very kind of rational way of working with things, and there can be the Dhammakaya, but it doesn't conflict. So that's great. But there's also, where's the trust come in? Am I really going to trust the Dhammakaya? But how could you trust the Dhammakaya? There's nothing to trust. So Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya is that how do we trust the teachings we're receiving? How do you trust me? That becomes a big question for you. And I'm not saying that's easy, or you should just like convince yourself to trust me. Actually, it should be your koan. How do you trust your teacher? Because if you spend enough time with your teacher, you see that they're obviously not a fully awakened Buddha, but there's something I have to trust in them. Mm-hmm. So that's important. How do you trust your communities? This is the Nirmanakaya type questions. And then there's the Sambhogakaya type questions are, what is my image of awakening? What do I see? And I mean that in a kind of general sense, but I also mean it in a very literal sense. What do you see in your mind's eye or your heart's eye when you regard the Buddha or the Bodhisattvas? How do you trust that? How do you pay respects to that? How do you venerate it? And how do you let it be active in your life? Those kind of questions of faith that arise in that realm of Sambhogakaya. How can you read, Diamond Sutra is like, you can read the Diamond Sutra in one way to try to extract meaning from it. So it's easier to kind of deal with, especially if you kind of kick out the inconvenient parts, which there are not so many. But like if you study the Lotus Sutra, you're dead in the water, right? There would be nothing left, except for some parables, which are nice parables. But that teaching of the Sambhogakaya Buddha, and that's so much, in your life as a novice. You're spending your days cleaning the temple, cleaning the ashes, making offerings, reading sutras, making prostrations. All of those kinds of things are, they're very Nirmanakaya things to do. They're very like embodied things to do, but they're also inviting us to this other kind of trust in something which can't be located in the subject-object type of relationship of the Sambhogakaya image of the Buddha. So there's another place to go. There's another place to go into, and this is a lot of our things that look more religious, traditionally religious to us, that are in that realm. And the beautiful thing about trust is, it will never give you the attributes without the no attributes. It will never give you like, oh, this is what trust looks like. Now you got it. Cool. You trust. That's what's so beautiful about trust, is that it requires us to see attributes and the non-attributes. That's what trust is. To be able to locate something that we can invest in, but also realize that it's not what we think it is, and there's a whole bunch of it we can't see at all, and yet we continue to invest in it. That's how the Buddha can entrust us, and that's how we can trust the Buddha.
And thinking also of, you spoke of the image of, our image of Buddha, but also our image of Subhuti, or our image of ourself.
Yeah.
And the trust in both how can I trust Buddha, but how can the Buddha inside me trust myself?
Yes. Exactly.
It's something I've never done.
I'm not so sure. When we sit down for meditation, generally speaking, when we talk about meditation, we think like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to kind of get myself in the shape of the Buddha, and that's true. That's one side of it. Making the vow to practice. But it's also true that by making this mudra, we're simply receiving the body of the Buddha. That's what it is. And that Buddha's nowhere but here. And the immediacy of sitting as the Buddha, whether that's cross-legged on a cushion or in a chair or even laying down, these are all the postures of the Buddha. And receiving that body, we say to receive and employ. This is how Dogen Zenji described meditation. He said it's Jijiu Zammai. Ji is self, Ju is to receive, and Yo is to employ or to actualize or to do. So this is the self-receiving and employing samadhi. This is the samadhi, this is the concentration of a Buddha. A Buddha receives and employs the self seamlessly. And we do that too when we sit down. We're not banging ourselves into shape, although sometimes it can feel like that, right? But we are receiving that body and employing it. And that's a great exercise of trust, and to be able to accept that I'm actually doing that is like a question of faith. And I would say most of the time, my experience is that I don't rise to the occasion. But the times when I have had some inkling of what I'm receiving, they fuel me to keep going.
And you're given another chance. And you're given another chance.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Indeed. So I'll just say in closing, I really encourage people, you can just stick with these first 5 chapters as a great way to do, and then someday you may go on to more. You may just stick with one of them, or you may go on to read the rest of the Diamond Sutra. I really recommend, Jacqueline, would you show that little book like this this is a little book that Red Pine, the translator that we've been using here, I forget the name of the press that it's from. Does it say on the back there, Jacqueline?
No, the little bowl.
Yeah. Little bowl. It's something like that, isn't it? Empty bowl.
Published, printed by McMullen and Young. Published by Empty Bowl Press.
Empty Bowl Press, yeah. They're up in Washington. Anyway, the thing that's really great about this is it's little. And so you can put it in your bag and you can carry it around. And then I went for my COVID shot today and I read it. And then they gave me a shot, and then they set the egg timer because I had to sit there for 15 minutes to make sure I didn't break out in hives or something. And then I could read it there. And then, you can go back to your phone for a little bit, but then you can read the Diamond Sutra. Anyway, I'd encourage people to just make this sutra a companion. And if it's not this sutra, another sutra, some teaching. But when again, I'll just end this way. I know I've said it a billion times, but not to consume the sutras, right? Not for them to be an object of your consuming, but to develop this deep relationship to see into the way in which you're already interpenetrated with the sutras. This is a real value of the tradition. And there's one, we have a famous story of one ogre that was so inspired by the Buddha Dharma, but the only thing that he knew how to do was to eat people. And so he ate tons and tons of these holy men because he was trying to get the Dharma. That's all he could do. And there's pictures of him. He's got a big red ogre with this, like a picture of a sage in his belly. You know, I love that. But that's what he could do, right? So if consuming sutras is what you need to do, go just eat as many as you can. There's no problem. You know, that will be the karma that leads to further things. But when it's time, then stop eating them, and then read them, and then be read by them, and then walk in that gate that they're an invitation to, and there's an immeasurable a joy in that, which is really the joy of our own awakening and the awakening of other beings. Thank you for being here these 6 weeks. We have next week, Thursday night, there won't be a class, and then following the week after that, there'll be a 6-week series on compassion practices, which will be taught by Anu, who's a teacher here at Budai, and I highly recommend. This is a shift from sutra study to a very direct embodied practice of wisdom and compassion. How do these two go together, which is just what we've been studying here in the Lotus Sutra. So that will go on for another 6 weeks.